So think of the pineal gland as a radio receiver. And the pineal gland is a tiny gland that sits between the back of your throat and the back of your head. And the pineal gland's primary function in normal three-dimensional reality is it manufactures two neurotransmitters called serotonin and melatonin. I mean, it has some other functions, but let's talk about that. Right. Now, the moment you wake up in the morning and your eyes open up and the wavelength of visible light is perceived in your eye, that wavelength of light hits the optic nerve, and the optic nerve sends a signal to a nucleus, which then sends a signal to another part of the brain, and then all of a sudden, the pineal gland gets the signal to make a chemical called serotonin. Serotonin is the daytime neurotransmitter. Our brain go into what's called beta brainwave patterns, and now we're alert, we're aware, we are aware that we have a body, we're aware that there's an environment, and we're very aware of time. Now, the inhibition of light, or the loss of light, when it gets dark, all of a sudden there's no more wavelength of light, the pineal gland switches off, and it takes serotonin and it begins to make another chemical called melatonin. Melatonin is the nighttime neurotransmitter, and melatonin then begins to change our brain waves into alpha, theta, and ultimately delta, and the body now can go into restorative sleep. So serotonin gets us up, melatonin puts us to sleep, and it's a function of what's called the circadian rhythm. How the sun rises and sets, people get used to that rhythm, right? Yes. So, however, there's latent systems in the brain when the pineal gland becomes activated. It has tiny little crystals in it that are calcite crystals, calcium carbonate crystals, and they're kind of rhombohedrons. They're six-sided, eight-sided, and they're stacked on top of each other. And I found the research to show that the pineal gland has some very unusual properties. So when the pineal gland becomes activated, those tiny little crystals begin to shimmer, and they begin to become electrically activated. And once they become electrically activated, they become sensitive to frequencies. Not frequencies of light. Light has to go through the eyes, through the senses. Once it's activated, it begins to pick up frequencies that are not perceived by the senses, and it transduces that frequency, because that frequency is carrying information, into very profound imagery. And now the person is having an inner vision. That's why it's called the third eye. And that inner vision is way more real than anything you've ever experienced in your three-dimensional reality. This is a very, very low frequency, but this is a very fast frequency. And all of a sudden, the pineal gland begins to make metabolites. Now, melatonin is already an antioxidant. But now, the derivatives of melatonin, when this gland is activated, produces very powerful antioxidants that heal. Anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. You take the molecule, you tweak it again, you have a benzodiazepine. What is that? That's Valium. It's your body, melatonin already relaxes you, but now, hang on, you are going to really chill out. You're going to be, survival centers in your body are going to be shut off, because that's what benzodiazepines do. They shut off your survival centers. So now you feel relaxed. It produces a chemical that puts the body into stasis. The first three centers, you lose sex drive, you lose appetite, you lose the preoccupation with your environment. The body is no longer, the mind, it's no longer driving us. Now you can dream without being interfered with your body. It produces a chemical that's the same chemical found in electric eels. Now the nervous system becomes amplified. Now it's electric. Your brain is going to switch on and you're going to have a lot of energy. And it produces that same chemical called dimethyltryptamine, which is a very powerful hallucinogenic. And now your brain is going to literally perceive another world, and it's going to be more real than this world. And we activate that system because I want people to realize that they're not a linear being living a linear life, that we are dimensional beings living a dimensional life. And you only need one of those experiences, Tobias, and you can't go back to being the same person again, because you realize this probably is the illusion and real. So there's a principle in biology, and it's an important principle. It's called endowment. And endowment means nature never wastes anything. So the principle in nature is if you don't use it, you lose it. Just get rid of it, right? So why do we have 98.5% of our DNA unused and it hasn't gone away? Why do we have this gland that hasn't been used by its full capacity? How come it's still there? We have all this. How come we have these big brains and we're not capitalizing off of that? Because those systems are waiting to be activated. It's our divine aspect of ourselves. So, yes, it takes a great effort. Yes, it takes a great will. But just like anything else, once that system begins to switch on, everybody says the same thing. That was so worth the effort. So I know that so when you start pumping that cerebrospinal fluid, there's little cilia on the end of the pineal gland, little hairs. When the fluid starts moving through the brain, through those caverns, it tickles the hairs. When we have people inhale and they hold their breath and they pump that fluid, they're pushing that fluid up against those crystals. And the crystals, this is research now, have a piezoelectric property. What does that mean? When you compress those crystals, the compression of those crystals, mechanical stress, turns into an electrical charge. Now, once they're electrically activated, they start to shimmer. Once they start to shimmer, they're now going to receive information. And now it's a radio dial. It's going to pick up information, and the brain's going to transduce it into imagery. And now that latent system switched on. And hang on, because people say, I want the unknown, but whoa, when it comes, it's big. Look, I mean, do you believe that everything that we're learning about the Egyptians is everything? No. Our research shows that when that system switches on in the brain, the entire limbic system of the brain, the limbic brain, in our research is on fire. It is highly activated. What is the limbic system? It's the pineal, it's the pituitary, it's the thalamus, it's the hypothalamus, it's the corpus callosum. It's just little package right underneath it, the hippocampus, the amygdala, this whole kind of network. That eye of Horus is a side section of that part of the brain. So our research shows that that limbic brain switches on. The Egyptians knew the thinking brain was the architect, the designer, and that this system was the creator. So design it with your thinking brain, but then surrender it and get out of the way and allow this system to hook up to energy and begin to turn it into to an experience. So I think the Egyptians, there's a lot of secrets in that culture that we haven't been told. That certainly the gods were real. Certainly the pharaohs had a connection to the gods, and certainly there were initiations that were about activating another world, entering another world, and I think that's the power behind the culture.